Trends in Sales Development in 2018. My name is Alex Ellison. I'm the Marketing Manager at Demand Drive, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. With me, I have Demand Drive's President and Co-founder, Lindsay Frey. She's been working in B2B sales and demand generation for 15 years, building and managing successful sales development programs for over 200 tech companies across the U.S. She started Demand Drive with her business partner, Dan Paul, 7 years ago, and as a company, we're focused on providing premier demand generation services. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you do have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat box in your Quick Meeting control panel. We'll take a look at them during the presentation, and we'll have time at the end dedicated to answering them. A recorded version of this webinar will also be available and will be sent out to you all shortly after it concludes. And additionally, if you're interested in learning more about Demand Drive, you can head to our website, demanddrive.com. There you'll be able to find everything you need from contact information to a summary of our services. Now, without further ado, I'll turn this over to Lindsay to get this started.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, for joining today. I know we're sitting here in Boston, and it's about 98 degrees outside, so I'm going to make this a fairly quick webinar, but definitely there's the few trends that I've noticed over the last 12 months or so that I wanted to share with you, and I'd love feedback. As Alex said, make sure you chat any questions or feedback or insights that you have as we go through the webinar today. So the first trend really that I want to focus on is, as far as managing and running sales development teams, is around technology fatigue and paralysis. So as all of you know, I'm sure that there are more sales development tools on the market than ever before. So you've heard of tools like SalesLoft and Outreach, and they're designed to help SDRs become more efficient at their jobs and allow them to hit a higher level of activity. However, I have noticed a point of diminishing return where SDR teams who are armed with so many different tools that they can become robotic or will hide behind the technology instead of picking up the phone. So if used the right way, these tools can be awesome. But my observation has been that they really should be geared and aligned towards automating lower value activities, lower value tasks, and that there still absolutely needs to be human-to-human interaction over the phone to establish rapport. So recently I sat down with a client who was managing a sales development team, and they were becoming really frustrated with their internal team because they were not hitting the goals that they had been given, and they had armed this team with, at least 4 to 5 different sales enablement tools that were designed to help them hit this goal that they had laid out for them. When I really dug in and looked at what their cadences and prospecting methodology was, I quickly noticed that their email cadences were pretty generic, and that they were set up through the tool, and they weren't adding in any additional contacts within their target accounts, and that they actually rarely picked up the phone unless they were leaving automated voicemails through the technology. So this was definitely posing a problem because there just wasn't as much human interaction and actually trying to get a prospect live on the phone or even get a referral via the phone. So the more SDRs rely on emails to book meetings, in essence, the less practice they're getting at talking to prospects on the phone, and the less confident they're going to be when they actually do. So, you know, an average or below average SDR, I'll see that sometimes these folks will book meetings almost entirely via email, where the top SDRs realize that in order to best qualify a lead, they actually have to pick up the phone and talk to someone. So utilizing sales enablement tools to set up things like cadences running in the background is great. It'll allow them to focus on mapping accounts, personalizing their message, and following up with the highest priority leads. So this kind of leads me into the second trend that I wanted to talk about today, which is around personalizing your messaging, right? So making sure that SDRs personalize their message, it's certainly not a new trend, but I think it's definitely worth a renewed focus. Because of the increase in sales enablement tools that we just talked about, prospects are getting bombarded with emails more than ever before. So how do you stand out amongst all of that noise? And that is, you have to personalize your messaging. So instead of sending out generic emails, SDRs really need to hone in on what their prospects care about and what's going to resonate with them. So I've seen a lot of SDR teams sending these lengthy, marketing-heavy emails, and I highly doubt prospects are getting through even the first few sentences. So these prospects will absolutely not and do not want to read through fluff, and they appreciate it when a sales rep or an SDR will get to the point with a concise message that is relevant to them. I think the other thing to keep in mind around emailing, if we're talking about that specifically, is how often SDRs are emailing their prospects. So you don't want to overload a prospect with too many messages, right? So they become kind of numb to them, but you also don't want SDRs to give up too quickly. Here at Demand Drive, we've noticed that about 4 emails over a 2-week period is appropriate, and then an email every couple of weeks to maintain a connection seems to work. Obviously, unless you get somebody to respond, then you would change your cadence. But as far as just outbound prospecting, that's a good kind of number to keep in mind. But no matter what your cadence is and what your team decides on, I think the most important thing to think about here is obviously personalizing the message and changing the message each time you send an email, right? So the worst thing is for a prospect to get an email that in essence is the same as they just received from the same SDR 2 days prior. And also to make sure to provide a clear call to action for the prospect. So if we're moving on to the third trend that I've noticed, it's really around how SDRs are being measured, right? So historically, I've seen most clients measure SDRs primarily on the number of appointments or meetings or demos that they book, and subsequently talking about what their cost per lead is. This can be deceiving for a number of reasons. So first off, a lead is rarely defined the same way, and I've definitely seen this to be the case where certain clients define leads a certain way and other clients define it quite differently. And booking an appointment not mean a whole lot if that appointment isn't qualified or isn't an appointment with the right person and isn't something that the sales team is necessarily getting excited about. So I'll often talk to clients who are really confident with their SDR team, and they talk about how their reps are putting up 20 to 30 appointments or demos a month, which again, depending on the type of technology you're selling, and can sound quite high. Yet when I dig in a little further, I find out, I ask the question, okay, well, what is the no-show rate of those meetings or drop-off rate? And a lot of times I'll find out that up to 50% of those meetings, and sometimes even more, will not show up for the call. So of those that do show up, usually I'll hear somewhere between, when I ask of the ones that show up, how many are actually qualified and moving forward through the sales process, typically hear about 20 to 30%. So that's quite a drop off from that 20 to 30 number that we're putting up, that the team's putting up in a month. So my suggestion here, instead of looking at how many appointments an SDR books, I've definitely seen a trend towards measuring teams on how much pipeline revenue can be attributed to the leads that the SDRs develop. So this is certainly a better indication of the quality of the leads, and I think speaks to most clients' overarching goal of driving revenue. So instead of looking at what the cost per lead is, I've now seen a trend towards clients talking about what the cost per opportunity is, which I definitely think better aligns with the goals of most companies. I think an SDR's comp plan should also focus on quality and pipeline versus the number of booked appointments or even like the number of overall calls and activity made. So if we're moving into the fourth trend, and one that I'm especially excited to see happening, is the integration between sales development and customer success teams. So we're certainly all familiar with the importance of the customer's experience and the customer journey, and you hear these buzzwords, and there's often within organizations separate teams and technologies in place to ensure that a customer is happy and is getting the most value out of the solution they purchase and has access to their customer success rep. And these customer success teams have a great deal of firsthand knowledge from these customers as to what they like about their product and sometimes what they don't like about the solution and what they value most. However, this information has historically been kept pretty siloed from sales. So instead of focusing on an account once the account actually becomes a paying customer, I feel there should be just as much effort and focus on the account during the prospecting phase. Oftentimes, an SDR might be the first interaction a prospect has with your brand, and it's important to provide them with the best experience right from the start. I also think SDR teams can learn a lot from the customer success team, and they should use this knowledge to personalize their message, going back to the trend we just talked about. And they can personalize their message and talk tracks based on the feedback they're getting from customer success reps. These customer success and product teams can also learn a lot from the SDRs as to what prospects want to see in a solution, what they might think of the competition. So this knowledge sharing is especially important too when there is a focus on account-based marketing, which I know a lot of companies are moving towards or have moved to. So I think getting some insight from both sales dev at kind of the front lines when a customer is just starting their journey up to when they are actually a paying customer. So the final trend I want to touch on is around how sales development teams are structured. So historically, the rule of thumb has been to align one SDR to support somewhere between 1 to 3 AEs. And I think this still works in some cases, but it can also lead to some AEs not receiving as many leads in a given month. And therefore, they're sort of left to do their own prospecting, or they're left frustrated because another AE got 4 of the 7 leads that month and they only received 1 or sometimes none. This typically doesn't set the AEs up well and doesn't align with their skill set. As my feeling is they should be focusing their energy on working active deals through the sales funnel instead of putting together an outbound prospecting cadence for themselves. So a trend I've definitely seen over the last year, and a lot of clients are moving towards this, is to have a higher number of SDRs supporting fewer AEs. So I've had, and as far as the numbers go, I've had clients set it up where 2 SDRs will now support 1 AE, and sometimes even more, so that the AE is getting plenty of leads a month and can work active deals instead of uncovering leads on their own. Now, the one caveat here that I'll mention, I think this definitely changes depending on the type of solution you sell. So I think this alignment is really best suited for enterprise customers, enterprise software companies with longer, complex buying cycles and lower lead volume. I think for companies that are selling a more transactional product, that 1-to-1 ratio or 1 SDR supporting 2 AEs can certainly still work just because of the volume there. This structure also makes sense for a lot of companies from a cost standpoint. So typically SDR resources are less expensive than highly paid, especially enterprise software AEs. So if you can get more productivity out of less AEs by feeding them more leads, then there is definitely a cost savings in the long run. When an SDR has to support several AEs, also they inevitably aren't able to spend as much time with their sales counterparts, which might impede their progress into target accounts, and they may not have time to build as much rapport and alignment with their account executive. And I think that's one thing that's really, really important to have that connection between SDR and AE, and have that communication open. They can work on target accounts together, they can strategize together, and I see that when that happens and when there is that good back and forth communication, programs and campaigns tend to be much more successful. So, and I promise that this would be pretty short, but just to wrap up those 5 trends, for you guys. So, first off, ensure that your reps use sales enablement tools the right way and not as a way to avoid picking up the phone or hiding behind email. Number 2, make sure to personalize messages since prospects are getting bombarded with emails more than ever. 3, measure SDR teams on the amount of pipeline that can be attributed to their leads and not just on the number of meetings they book. 4, learn what you can from your customer success team and treat prospects as if they already are a paying customer. And lastly, think about how your SDR team is structured and whether it might make more sense to have a higher number of SDRs support fewer AEs. So just some things to think about as you're either managing a team or building a team or thinking about starting a team. And certainly, I'll turn it back to Alex, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can kind of use the chat box there, and then we can wrap up after that.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Very insightful stuff. Like you just said, we'll go ahead and take some time for some questions. It looks like a couple are coming in right now. So take a minute or two if you guys want to. Take a minute or two if you guys want to fill out some questions in your little chat panel down there on the side, and we'll go through them as they come in.
All right.
All right, so it looks like our first question from Walter is, can you share an example of a quick intro message that you could send to a prospect?
So I'm assuming this would be an email, and that's a great question. And I think, again, going back to making sure that your message is, different each time. I really like when I'm, having my teams send an intro message, and I'm assuming here that there has been no interaction between the SDR and this prospect. So this is a cold outreach, let's say, into a target account, into who you are assuming is the right persona. I always like to keep the first message very, very short. I would say no more than 3 or 4 sentences max. And I tend to like to ask. I like to reference something from their LinkedIn profile so that it shows that you've done at least a little bit of work into understanding who they are. I can't tell you how many emails that I get from other sales development companies trying to pitch me the exact service that we're selling. So you want to make sure, first off, that you've done at least a little due diligence looking over their LinkedIn profile and referencing, saying something like, I understand you are the director of information security at XYZ company, looking to, connect with the person on your team that would handle this. We have, and then something along the lines of, we have a solution that I think might, help in XYZ area. So almost asking for a referral and not assuming, to put the burden on them to respond. We see very good response rate when we simply ask, who on your team, who could you point me to as that sort of first touch point. And then you can kind of build on that from there. So as a second touch, you might want to drop a customer reference or include a link to a meaningful piece of content from your website. The third touch might be, referencing an industry article that sort of speaks to the solution that you sell. So you kind of always build on the emails from there. But long story short, first message, I would suggest mention something from their LinkedIn profile and just, ask to be routed to the right person.
Great. Now we have another question coming from Tyler. So thinking about money in terms of pipeline as measurement, how should those pipeline opportunities be measured in terms of dollars? Would you trust a lowly SDR without much sales experience to accurately qualify how much money in the pipeline there is?
Yeah, another great question. So when I look at how to best measure SDRs, and when we talk about, really tying them back to pipeline revenue, I think absolutely the sales team has to play a huge part here. So I'm not saying that the SDR should be responsible for converting leads to opportunities or keeping track of, how much ACV is in on the forecast. But I do look at a couple different gating events as far as how to measure SDRs against revenue and against pipeline generation. So the first step would be, what percentage of the meetings that an SDR books convert to an opportunity at all, right? So, if they've passed 10 meetings and 8 of them convert, the sales rep is converting to an opportunity on forecast at any stage, right? Even if it's 10%. That would be kind of the first gating event, and that would be a good leading indicator that this SDR is passing qualified leads, or at least leads that are moving forward in the sales process. The next gating event would be around, you could look at, of this, if you're looking at a certain quarter, of this SDRs, all the leads that the SDRs passed, how many this quarter have, number one, converted to an opportunity, and two, at what stage, right? So if an SDR was you're converting a lot of ops and they're all landing at 10% and they stay there, then that's information that you can use. Certainly it can get tough because it's not entirely up to the SDR. Sales teams also have to be very much aligned, and they have to understand, what the process is and when to convert things at what stage. You definitely want to look at the different stages and see things moving forward. And then ultimately, a lot of our clients will look at, after a certain amount of time, based on what your sales cycles are, how much revenue has closed that can be attributed back to the leads that the SDR has passed.
Great. Looks like we have time for one more question.
Yeah, sure, of course.
So Ben asks, how would you split up inbound leads to AEs to ensure that there's a more equal division if the historical way of doing it is territory-based?
So it sounds like if there's inbound leads coming into the SDR team, how do they get funneled back over to AEs maybe? So this is you can do it a couple different ways. When we're looking at outbound and inbound, two very different things, and I think two very different skill sets. My opinion is to still, if you have enough of a volume of inbound leads coming in, I still do think it's worthwhile to have a separate SDR qualify and respond to those inbound leads versus an SDR who's doing the proactive prospecting into your target accounts and more of that kind of cold outreach. But all that being said, I think that if you historically were territory-based and geographically based, and you're moving to more of like a round robin, you can set it up a couple different ways. A lot of times clients will round robin the inbound leads, but they'll keep the AEs territory focused. So they'll each still have a territory or own an industry and have a set of target accounts that they own, and they might work very closely with their SDRs as far as like, okay, how are we going to penetrate these particular accounts? And then as inbound leads are coming through in the background, and if those inbound leads don't align or align with one of the target accounts, you want to double check that first. Then you can simply just do sort of like I said, like a round robin type structure where I have a client who has a very like sort of simple document with their 8 AEs listed out, and the SDRs will see like who got the last one, and they just simply go through the list. You could also break it up where if they are geographically focused, you can just make sure that if there's an MQL comes in that's in their territory, they automatically get it. But if you want to kind of keep it very fair and spread the wealth, then just a round robin via document or via Salesforce in a report is probably easy enough.
Great. Well, it looks like we've covered all the questions. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We really appreciate it. Once again, we'll be sending out the webinar recording shortly. And if you do have any follow-up questions or want to get in touch with Lindsay or with Demand Drive, we'll have instructions included in the recording we sent out. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.